So our two speakers today come from the Tulsa Speech and Hearing Association. TSHA is how they are known today. We have Renee Sites, who's the Deaf Services Manager, and we have Diana Emerson, who's the Program Director and also a Leadership Tulsa graduate. And I believe that Renee is going to start us off. So I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to turn it over to Renee.
Okay, hello everyone. Hold on one moment. Just wanted to make sure that my interpreter would go ahead so I could see her. Thank you. Hello. Yes, my name is Renee Sites. My sign name is Renee, and I'm the Deaf Services Manager at TSHA. And you might be wondering what that means. That means I work with culturally deaf adults. Let me see if I can pull up my notes here. So I wanted to teach you just a quick sign, deaf. Everyone try that, deaf. Can you copy me? Deaf. We promised to teach a few signs. Culturally deaf people tend to be involved in the deaf community itself. Like I grew up as a hard of hearing individual. I had just a mild hearing loss early on, and then my hearing got worse and worse over the years until I became completely deaf. Now, a lot of people use the word hearing impaired. However, that's not really politically correct terminology. We in the community prefer either deaf or hard of hearing. Or you might say people with hearing loss. So those are more polite ways instead of hearing impaired. I grew up, as I said, going to the School for the Deaf. And in that school life is where I became kind of the person I am today. My parents decided to expose me fully to deaf culture. And without that exposure, I don't think I'd be the person that I am today in terms of leadership and so on. I'm a former president of the Oklahoma Association of the Deaf, a Miss Deaf Oklahoman, and I was a 2018 Tulsa Woman of the Year. And my deaf life and identity has given me so many different leadership skills that I never envisioned that I would have when I was a hearing individual. I'm so sorry. I want to discuss just a little bit about barriers that I face every day in my life that are challenges. You know, we're seeking equality, of course, in terms of access. But if I make an appointment for the doctor, most of the time I have to explain what I mean, how to get an interpreter. Then I have to hope that the place is actually willing to provide that access. Can you all imagine if you went to your doctor's office and your doctor just communicated in writing? That was it. You know how doctors tend to handwrite. It's impossible to read. And do you really think they're going to write everything that they would have told you? The information that they do put down is just not of great benefit to me. So that's, you know, imagine going to Department of Human Services or Social Security office. It's so critical that there's full communication through an interpreter. They are that lifeline that bridges that gap between someone like myself and all of the hearing community, the agencies, the organizations, the businesses out there that I need to connect with. So now, I am happy that TSHA is here because I've learned so much myself about how to advocate for myself and for others. In my office, we teach deaf individuals how they can advocate for themselves to become more independent. And also, we're a little bit different. Maybe I myself am a little different from the majority of deaf people, because many deaf individuals who've grown up deaf read at perhaps an 8th grade level at best. I grew up more hearing, so English is strong for me. But many in the culturally deaf community just don't grow up with the same social awareness that you all do, that you absorb. And they may have behaviors that might not seem quite appropriate or polite because they have not been absorbed from overhearing. So there's many things that we can do at TSHA. If you have a deaf consumer come into your office, we're here to help. If you're not sure if they're understanding what you're trying to communicate, or you're feeling perhaps they might need some additional support to help guide them through, navigate through your systems and processes, that's something we offer. We can support both you, your agency, your organization, your school, whatever it might be, and also we can support that deaf consumer. So we are available for you. And of course, that providing an interpreter can be key as well. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Oklahoma Legal Interpreter Act are two laws that help us as deaf individuals get interpreter access. They support our right to that by the law. We are here, as I said, to help community members fill out paperwork, get equal access, set up appointments, and just encourage them in their everyday life. So today, I'm going to go ahead and hand this presentation over now to Diana, and she's going to take over. But I do want to take one moment to explain that she's in a dual role today. This is not a typical situation. Typically, we would have brought in an outside interpreter separate from a presenter. But Diana and I have worked so closely together over the years that we're used to each other's style of presentation and turn taking. So I do just want to mention that this is not typical. You would normally bring a third-party interpreter in to do that job alone. So take it away, Diana. Thank you, Renee. And yes, I appreciate that introduction and lead in. I am Diana Emerson. I've worked at TSHA for 32 years now. I know that's impossible because I'm only 33. And I have a degree from TU in deaf education, as well as a master's degree from OU Tulsa in human resources. And I am a nationally certified sign language interpreter in addition. So together with Renee, we hope that the both of us will give you all perspectives around the deaf and hard of hearing community. Renee has already mentioned the importance of interpreters. She told you a little bit about her department, which is Deaf Services, and her services are completely free. There is no charge for her to assist guiding a deaf consumer of yours through navigating whatever they might need to know. In our Interpreter Services Department, which is another of our 3 departments at TSHA, the Interpreter Services is run very much like a business because, as Renee mentioned, the law requires that you provide access. So if a sign language interpreter is needed to go to the doctor, it is the doctor's responsibility to pay for that interpreter, just as they provide the ramp for the person in the wheelchair to access their building. The person in the wheelchair does not pay and bring their own ramp in order to access your services. In the same way, neither should a deaf person have to pay to bring their own interpreter to access your services. If you're accessible to the public, you need to be accessible to all of the public. So I hope that helps explain. Many times people don't understand why they need to pay to provide that. And so when you kind of compare it to the ramp concept, I think they get it a little bit better. So our Interpreter Services Department is available 24/7. We get calls in the middle of the night for emergency room interpreters who are needed to go right then and there. And so we do our best to provide at all hours of the day and the night. We contract with certified interpreters to provide that communication access. And honestly, for your side, things go so much faster if you do use a certified interpreter and you know that your client has understood much more clearly. Our third department at TSHA, and by the way, we are a United Way partner agency, and we've been around since 1953 is when we first got our start with parents of deaf children who found there was nothing for their kids in the area. So that's how TSHA was planted and grew all of these years. So here we are with the three departments. And again, community resources is that third department. And that focuses more on families that have deaf or hard of hearing children. It focuses on hard of hearing, which includes many, many elderly people. If you all out there know somebody who is starting to lose their hearing, maybe yourself, raise your hand. You can even do it virtually. Here, raise your hand for me. Do you know somebody, a neighbor, a parent, a grandparent that's beginning to have some hearing loss? We are here to serve that population as well, not just the signing population. So, and then we also in community resources reach out to the general population. So we provide educational presentations. We provide community sign language classes that are non-credit, no grade, low stress. We do charge for those because we hire a teacher, and those will be starting at the end of February for our ongoing course in partnership with Jenks Community Ed, if you're interested in learning more. And then we're also going to be offering on-demand classes for the community. So if you'd like to have a short class for your workplace, we will set it up specifically for you via Zoom, and it will be very easy to do that. And we can focus on the vocabulary you need in your workplace. So a really cool opportunity that Zoom helps to make available. So those are just a very brief overview of some of the services that we do provide at TSHA. Some, again, are at absolutely no cost because we are a nonprofit United Way agency. Some, like the sign classes, because we have to pay a teacher, or the interpreter because we pay professional interpreters. Those, of course, do have a cost. I hope that you all will begin typing your questions into the chat, or however Wendy normally handles this. We were so concerned about going long because Renee and I can both really get going on our topics here that we may have gone too short. But at TSHA, again, I think that hard of hearing population, the deaf population, all ages, we can help to tell people about equipment, assistive technology that may help, like doorbells that will flash a light. That can change your elderly relative's life if they're not missing someone that's standing at their front door. Telephones that will caption what you say so that, again, someone you know who's suffering hearing loss later in life can communicate via the telephone. There are a lot of resources out there. There's some resources for hearing aid help, and we try to make those available as well. Of course, there's rarely enough money or enough help, but there is some. So in any of these areas, please reach out and start with TSHA as the place just to decide where to begin on that journey to helping someone who's deaf or hard of hearing. Wendy, if you want to open it to questions. Again, I don't know if we are way early.
So one thing we talked about doing, and before we got some questions coming, and I've got some, but we talked about maybe a few quick signs. Like, what would be the 5 signs that would just make us better people first community members if we encounter someone who's deaf in our community?
Well, I will throw out one, and then I'll let Renee throw out one. One of the most common, of course, would be your name. Often, if somebody walks in your office, you need to know what their name is, right? To be able to help. So everyone practice with me. The flat hand is possessive. So your name. Your dominant hand on top of your passive hand. I'm a right-handed person, so my right hand's on top.
Your name.
Your name.
Your name.
what? In ASL, words like is that have no visual meaning are not signed. So your name, what? You need to have the question should be right there on your face. Your name, what? And then give them a paper and pencil and let them write down their name. Okay. Renee, what's a common sign you want to teach? Help. Like, can I help you? You can encompass that all in this one sign, help, with a question on your face. So your dominant hand holds up your passive hand. So just help.
So this tells me why it's so expressive when we watch interpreters, is because some of the meaning comes from our expression.
Renee says exactly. Yes, that's correct. Yes, Diana here. I know some people think we're exaggerating, but the grammar is in your face. Mm-hmm. You know, if I'm wanting to say, oh, I'm happy today. There it was. I'm happy today. I am thrilled today. I'm overjoyed. We don't have a different sign for those words. We have a different way of expressing how much strength of meaning is in the sign. So Renee, you want to add to that? Yes, well, I see a question being asked about how do you sign I don't know. So here you go. I don't know. I do not know. You don't shake your head right to left, but you do want to shake your actual head at the same time you're signing that. If you shook your head yes while you said I don't know, we would be totally confused. So you want to shake your head no at the same time you're saying I don't know with your hand. So the facial expression is key to the meaning behind. There's so many meanings that can be encapsulated in one sign, and it all depends on the expression that is given out at the same time. It impacts the meaning. So there you go with that. And Diana here, I will say that the sign for no, you know something, you are holding it in your head. So when you don't know, it's kind of an opposite movement. I know, I don't know, I don't know. It's not up there. I don't know. Okay. Really good one. I'm thinking that your name, can I help you? I don't know. Sign. You have kind of your number one hands. Everybody do this with me. And they rotate back in a circle. Sign. So you can say, I don't, by shaking your head, I don't sign. I don't sign. Or I don't know, sign. There you go, Renee says, exactly. The same, you might want to have the sign for interpreter. Perhaps the deaf person is telling you, interpreter, they would like an interpreter. So that's your two, it's the letter F, but your two F hands, put them together and your dominant hand moves like you're interpreting away. Okay, interpreter. Okay. Renee says, I don't mind sharing very quickly a barrier story that I encountered.
That would be great.
Again, I really want to encourage you all to use, this was a situation where someone wanted to use family member or friends as interpreters. I guess my son was maybe around 37. I don't know, or maybe, but he said he had a pain, a severe pain. So I brought him to the emergency room, had pain in his side, and I was very concerned. But I was writing back and forth notes with the doctors. It was quite frustrating. So I asked for an interpreter and they said, oh, 1 minute. And a girl arrived. She could sign about like this. She was not an interpreter. She didn't have the vocabulary. I could not express my concern for my son fully in the few words that she had. So the doctor finally sent me home and said, oh, there's nothing wrong. And that was how the interpreter communicated it. 3 days later, the pain became severe. We went to a different community emergency room. They immediately brought in an interpreter and explained the whole situation. And it was a ruptured appendix. They had surgery the next morning. So that's how critical information, complete information is that I could not express in that first situation where they're saying, oh, we have someone who knows sign language. You know, it's not enough. It's just not enough. So I really do encourage you always to use a qualified interpreter for interactions with clientele. It could save a life.
So we have a couple really interesting questions. One was personally sent to me, and that is, do you provide services for Spanish speakers? Which makes me wonder, is there a different sign language in different languages?
I asked her if it would be all right if I answer that. So Diana here, yes, sign language is different in every country. You have German sign language and French sign language and Mexican sign language. So they are not universal. Sometimes people assume that, but just as the spoken languages grew up separated from each other, the signed languages came up separated from each other. So they are totally different. Here, TSHA has actually worked more and more over the recent maybe 5 to 10 years with immigrants from other countries who are deaf. They're already grown, so when they arrive here, they have to learn English and American Sign Language, and they become sometimes quadrilingual themselves in order to function here in America, because we don't have Russian Sign Language interpreters, for example. We had a woman that moved here from Kazakhstan, and she just had to jump into the community and absorb the language, really, and did so very successfully and very well. Her hearing husband still signs mostly Russian Sign Language because he learned from her, but the deaf wife is fluent in ASL.
So Denise asked, she'd heard about a Black American Sign Language. And so similar question, is that something that you all are fluent with? Is that a thing here in Tulsa?
Renee's saying, I'm not familiar with that. Diana here, yes, I understand that years ago, there were separate schools for the deaf, for Black deaf and for white deaf, but that's been quite a while back, so probably before Renee's time. And so there was a little bit different accent, if you will, on the sign languages. And there was a little bit more struggle, therefore, for interpreters sometimes to communicate and connect with the Black deaf language. But that's been a while ago, and luckily those schools have been together for some time, and so we don't see the variation in the language now, particularly.
Denise also asked, how long would a typical class for an employer last if they wanted to learn some language specific to their workplace needs?
Diana here, I'll answer because I set up those sign language classes. We have done everything from, one time I think we provided 2 sessions for FedEx. They had a deaf employee. Another time we provided like a 6-week class for Macy's. They had a deaf employee. So it really is just up to you. That's the beauty of an on-demand class. It can be up to you and your scheduling. You can always start with several weeks, see how it goes, and then we can book additional classes later if you feel you want more. Some people have done that as kind of a lunch and learn time option, and it's pretty cool.
So Mercedes asks if you have interpreters able to tap into virtual tools to aid access in this virtual world. And one of the things that I love is that we were able to pin both of you. You had also mentioned to me a closed captioning service. So what are the challenges with distance interpreting, and maybe what are some tools that this creates that we wouldn't have had otherwise?
And I'm gonna let Renee start to answer that. Well, virtual interpreting has already been happening, obviously, for people who live in rural areas that couldn't get access. People couldn't drive that far fast enough. Occasionally, doctors' offices, a hospital, somebody will provide a VRI, virtual remote interpreting, via a laptop or something. here with the spread of COVID, TSHA has begun offering virtual interpreting like you're seeing today. And also with deaf children, they've have interpreters in the classroom. And so that's been a little bit of a frustrating situation with COVID, because sometimes, you know, deaf kids, their attention's all over the place. So a Zoom meeting with an interpreter works obviously exactly the way that you're seeing now, but it can be a challenge for children. So they started one way, and then I think they had to switch over to a different way using interpreters via Zoom. And then deaf individuals have been able to schedule their time, who they want to speak to in advance, and then just book a virtual interpreter like this instead of someone coming out in person, to make sure that the kids stay caught up if it's a school situation. But again, it really works very similarly to a live interpreter. We haven't seen more problems. I'm very grateful to have this option available during this time. And Diana, do you have anything else to add to that? I will add that the captioning tools have probably also been out there. I sent Wendy something yesterday that I was playing with. There's something called Web Captioner. That is just an online free, you all can type in web captioner, boop, there it will be, and hit the on button and it will start printing everything you say. It's pretty cool. And yesterday I was playing with it will integrate into Zoom. And we haven't even really been doing that yet, because there's so much out there to try to learn about. But there are some really wonderful tools that have helped access a lot. Renee, you might want to talk about some of the apps that are out there now that help deaf and hard of hearing people. Renee says, I'm not going to necessarily think of them all right off the top of my head, but Caption Call, they have there's different ways to provide captioning via apps, of course, if that's what you need. One challenge is freezing in this virtual world. So if the sign language interpreter freezes, then we have to wait. And one of my biggest frustrations is somebody saying, okay, Renee, do you want to answer that? And I'm like, okay, well, do you mind repeating everything you just said while you were frozen? Because I've missed it. So the apps might be beneficial in some of those arenas with captioning added. The words can give full access every day to phone calls in certain realms. Also the video phones that we use where we can see sign language interpreters, that has provided wonderful access, and that's a free service to users. It's there and available for everyone at no additional cost. And Diana here, that's paid for by the taxes we all pay on our phone bills for providing accessibility. So yes, there are video phones that can be provided for free to deaf signing people. There are caption telephones that can be provided free to your elderly, hard of hearing neighbor. And those services, there's no additional charge for using those services because we taxpayers provide that. And a lot of people don't know about those free or low cost resources, which is why I encourage you to reach out to us and see if there's anything that could benefit someone you know.
So Oboom has a question that he said was kind of long to type, so he's going to unmute himself and share it.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Renee, for all this valuable information. My question is more, can you discuss kind of the best practices for those of us who may be hosting an event or a virtual meeting or even a live event, and we have an interpreter there? What's the best way for us to, do we always say, you know, welcome to our, you know, deaf or hard of hearing community, we have an interpreter? And if so, me as a host, I don't know much sign, you know, I don't know the sign language, but is it okay for me to also maybe do the welcome sign and say, welcome to our deaf or hard of hearing community? You know, how do I get that without sounding so awkward as I do right now?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yes. I do not mind answering that at all, Renee says. That's a great question. I think everyone feels the same way, including myself. One thing I've learned is if I'm going to a regular general meeting, many people will just show up in the hearing community. But for myself, you know, if I just show up and I haven't let you know, I don't expect to be introduced in any way. if it's a virtual meeting, I'll pin the interpreter for myself and be able to go there. But the best practices for being able to help me is to have everyone close their video actually during a group meeting like this, because I like to be able to see myself, the presenter and the interpreter. And it helps me if those squares are bigger. So when everybody else closes their video, they usually go off screen, and that allows the few that are still live on video to be seen bigger. And then the interpreter, in a long meeting, we tend to have a team of 2 interpreters who will switch out every 20 minutes to avoid fatigue. And if that switch happens in the middle of the presenter talking without taking a breath, I'm going to miss something, because now I've got to switch, pin the other interpreter. So please, if you'd let us know or ask the interpreter to go ahead and announce verbally that there's a switch, have the presenter pause while I find the new interpreter square, get her pinned, and then proceed on with the presentation. That's very, very helpful. Now, I don't know about hearing people, what you all think about this, but we do tend to raise our hands, I think, online in the deaf community, so that we can recognize who's going to speak and take turns more appropriately. That way the interpreter can kind of say who it is that's speaking. Diana's speaking, Wendy's speaking. So then I always know who is speaking at the time, because my eyes are on the interpreter. So did that help answer your question, Sam? I hope.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And Diana, here I will add that typically you can add a note to your, like if you're presenting a presentation for the general public, you don't have to just always provide an interpreter, because most of the time there's probably not going to be a deaf person there. But if you will add at the bottom that please give us, 72 hours notice if you need a sign language interpreter or whatever, that's great. And then a person will feel they can reach out, let you know, I'd like to attend. Please, do you mind getting me an interpreter? And then you can contact TSHA or whoever will send out that qualified interpreter. Of course, the more advanced notice, the better, because there is a limited pool of highly certified interpreters. And we're not going to send you someone who is not qualified to keep up with your presentation.
I love that idea about being welcoming by making a note, and it shows that you're leaning into wanting to accommodate and be inclusive. So I love that idea. I do know we had interpretation for our Good News Summit one year, and that was wonderful. And I got the chance to visit it was the Christmas Carol theater production on the night that there were interpreters. And that enriched the experience for me as a hearing audience member, just because it was so wonderful to watch the interpretation. I have found this to be very enlightening, and I want to launch our closing poll. Let's see, where do I find there's my second poll. And we're going to see now, after this presentation, how you feel about your knowledge of this subject. So if everyone who's on the call would take a moment to answer our poll.
And Wendy, Diana here.
Yes.
Those 2 things that you mentioned, TSHA was a part of making accessible. The Good News Summit, I think Renee was there. And then Christmas Carol, we work with them every year to get that word out to the deaf community. So cool that you have seen those things.
Right. Okay, it looks like most people have done this. No one quite feels like an expert, and I think that is probably appropriate given we only had 45 minutes together today. But it does feel like people all feel much more equipped than they did at the end. Oh, there, you guys get to see it now. So Denise says that she's seen interpreters at concerts and it was magical for her as well. So with that, Renee and Diana, if you want to put your emails in the chat thread, feel free to do that before I close out the meeting. And otherwise, if anyone doesn't have a chance to capture that, please reach out to me and I can connect you to either of these amazing ladies. And I feel like this is such an appropriate moment to be thinking about how, from a lens of equity and inclusion, that we don't forget people who use interpreters to navigate the world.
And Diana here, I will add that because I know so many companies do require equity and inclusion trainings periodically, that if you'd like something different that doesn't feel like it's the same focus all the time, TSHA does provide some wonderful workshops and presentations related to deafness. That's kind of a whole different perspective on equity and inclusion. So feel free to let us know.